Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 495, featuring Yo Plaete, who is the Chief Innovation Officer over at and Visual Effects Supervisor over at Metaphysic AI, and it's a very, very interesting company. I actually learned about them through Ed Ulbrich, who I've known for many, many years. Good friend of mine. I knew him back in the digital domain days. But Ed is part of Metaphysic now, and he introduced me to about a year and a half ago or so when we were at the Real-Time Economics Summit. And I was talking about specifically some of the AI tools they're doing on digital humans, and had been talking about a big project they've been working on, specifically a movie by Mr. Robert Zemeckis that is now out, called Here, and how they were working with specifically Tom Hanks and Robin Wright, and as well as a couple other characters in the movie to create digital human versions of them that have a different age. And so it was really, really fascinating to hear that, to hear about how they do it, to talk about the process with what they're doing, because it's all done through AI tools these days, and really kind of revolutionary in a lot of ways. So it was really cool to hear that, to talk to Yo specifically about the technology, where he came from and his past, obviously, and what they're doing there. And it was really fascinating to hear about the process that AI artists are involved, or how artists are involved in the process of creating these things, which is very different than they were done in the old ways with, meshes and blend shapes and everything else. But there are certain ways that blend shapes or ways that blend shapes were used in the past that are reapplied now in terms of neural models. So it's really kind of interesting to hear that as well. So really, really great. If you want to know the process of what it is, you want to know about their thoughts on AI in general, or Yo's thoughts on AI in general, and about the ethics and all the other things. It was a fantastic conversation. In fact, I saw Ed Ulbrich just this last week. He was over at the Infinity Festival, and he had a talk where he talked about how Metaphysic is working specifically with talent and with actors and with other famous people as well, in terms of what digital humans work means to them and how it's going to work. So great conversation. Really, really highly recommend it. Okay, a couple of announcements, actually some big announcements, so bear with me here. We've got a couple of big products that are out. And of course, V-Ray 7 is officially out. I'm very, very excited about it. Lots of great stuff going on here. The big thing that a lot of people are talking about is Gaussian splat support. Yes, inside of V-Ray 7, we actually support native Gaussian splats through ray tracing. Yes, indeed, you can actually ray trace the Gaussian splat onto CG geometry at the same time. So we can load a Gaussian splat and then add your CG elements to that environment, and they will reflect and react correctly towards the Gaussian splat, because we can actually ray trace where that Gaussian splat is, which is really a big, big advancement. So you guys should definitely check that out. Other things we've got a new virtual tour tool inside of V-Ray, which is kind of fascinating as well. Firefly removal. Yes, if you guys how fireflies are always sort of a little thing that happens with ray tracing, and always you need to put very high samples to try to get rid of them. We now actually have an automated way to remove fireflies, or to detect them and remove them. So it's really good to have that. We also have a new better sun and sky system that enables us to detect very low angles, or angles of the sun below the horizon, which gives you some basically better twilights. Really great to see that as well. We have some new tools inside of the virtual frame buffer as well, including custom render regions, where they're not just squares, but different polygonal shapes that you want to have a render region. You can do that. We have some vignetting stuff that we've added in post, as well as some other cool color correction presets that you guys can add and remove, which is really cool. A bunch of things have been added to Scatter, V-Ray Scatter. So we have instance brushes, distribution maps, and we even have a much faster way of exporting very heavy instance scattered scenes. And we've got a bunch of things added to Cosmos. Specifically, one of the things a lot of people are excited about is the new Lumiere support. So if there's an actual light, like a light fixture inside of Cosmos, we actually support it with a Lumiere, which enables you to get the lighting from that light source much more efficiently inside of your scene. So just check it out. Look at what the new Lumiere is. I'm not going to get too much into it. We've got a new profiler, which is really cool. There's a new geometry tab inside of V-Ray Lister. A lot of people love the V-Ray Lister, be able to find all the lights that they need to turn off and on, but we actually now support an actual tab for geometry that you can turn off and on inside of Lister, which is also very cool to have. A bunch of advancements have been done in V-Ray GPU as well, which is different than Vantage. But V-Ray GPU now have a much faster time to first pixel, which is super exciting. We now support caustics natively on the GPU, which is exciting. And we have a new implementation of out of core, so you guys can have very heavy scenes that need a lot of texture memory. We now support that as well. It was a newer implementation of out of core. We've extended our USD support on top of all that, and we have now open PBR support. So lots and lots of stuff happening in V-Ray 7. Super excited to see that. Just go to chaos.com to find out about that. One more product announcement I want to do is Vantage 2.6.1 is out, and it also has so a lot of new advances as well. Obviously, Vantage is our real-time ray tracer. It's different than V-Ray, but based on the same technology as V-Ray, same renderer, or same ray tracing math. It's different renderer, actually. But yeah, we have some new support inside of our real-time ray tracing. Very excited about that. We now support subsurface scattering. Super cool. So lots of subsurface scattering now in real time. Fully ray traced in real time. We also have a new water shader support, which is pretty exciting. So check that out. We now have full opacity control. Before we had opacity only for off and on, right? So it was only fully opaque or fully transparent. Now we have opacity in between that is supported and ray traced. We have the V-Ray Clipper is supported. We have added VR controller support. So if you have VR controllers that you want to be able to support inside of Vantage, we can do that, as we already have had VR headset support. So now we support the controllers, and we have a whole bunch of new camera tools as well. So lots of things to check out. Big product announcements. In terms of events, we have a lot of small events going on. Of course, it's towards the end of the year, so it's not going to have as many as we've had before. But just go check it out. chaos.com/events for all of our events that were coming up. Again, chaos.com/events. Now, if you guys want to know more about the podcast, of course, you can just continue to check out the podcast at chaos.com/CGGarage. We are also available on Facebook at facebook.com/CGGarage podcast. Our YouTube channel has changed. If you would like to see the YouTubes of all of our videos, of all of our podcast videos, let's go to youtube.com/@CGGaragePodcast. Again, youtube.com/@CGGaragePodcast. And if you're there, please make sure and like and subscribe to us. That way you will get notifications of all of the podcasts on YouTube as they come out. And of course, you will see them in video format. I know a lot of you guys, big majority of you guys just listen to these, but if you'd like to watch them, they're available on YouTube as well. All right. And of course, if you have ideas of podcasts, we've actually been getting some really good ones lately that'll be coming out soon. Just go to email us. labs@chaos.com is our email. labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 495 with Yo Play It.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
Okay, so, like we were saying just before we hit record, you and I last met and guessed in spring of 2023. We were both at the Real-Time Economics Summit, and you were introduced to me through our mutual acquaintance, Mr. Ed Ulbrich. Who's a fascinating person and I've known for many years. And he could not be more excited about what you guys have been doing and telling me all about it. And Ed and I have had discussions over the last 15 plus years or more about digital humans and our passion for that subject. So we're definitely going to get into that, as well as obviously the work that's you guys has been sort of put into the forefront right now with the movie here, and we'll talk a lot about that as well. But before we do any of that, let's get a little background into you. So how did you, were you a computer science person? Were you a computer graphics, an artist person? What's your background? What got you involved into this journey where you are now and ended up doing all this work?
Yeah. But it's kind of an overlap of both of that. I started as my background, my kind of bachelor degree was in kind of computer science, multimedia, quite technical, more programming. The days where Flash was big, macromedia, and so done a lot of that back then.
So this must have been the 90s, right? Late 90s?
No, yeah, late 90s. Yeah, exactly. Yes, indeed. And then kind of, I had this kind of module in my last year. I remember was introduction to computer graphics, 3ds Max, and it's very kind of fascinated by that. And at the end of that year, there was a talk on a conference that the school organized, and a fellow Belgian. I'm Belgian.
Oh, you're Belgian. Okay, that was going to ask where you're from.
Yeah, this is all in Belgium. This part.
And where were you in Belgium? Were you?
I was in Kortrijk in a studying in Kortrijk, and
okay.
So that talk, a fellow Belgian, Tom Kluiskens, came and gave a talk on his work he had just completed on Lord of the Rings, one of the first movie, I think so. Or the third one, actually. He had been involved with the whole lava work and sequence, and I was just blown away. And it kind of triggered something that's oh, that's cool, and that's something I'd love to pursue. Now, at the time, there wasn't much to hook onto that, education-wise, back in Belgium. So ultimately, a year later, I decided to move to the UK, to Bournemouth, and I did the master's computer animation, which is kind of more a master's of arts. So which is where I found out that it's actually quite powerful combination to hook up a technical background in this field with some more kind of the artistry that goes into creating the visuals and the pictures, right?
So were you always a technical person as well? Were you always, when did you start programming and stuff? Did you start before school? And we were
before school, yes. Yeah. Before school, I was programming, websites and early JavaScript, HTML, and then got into Flash, and then school did give me some better grounding in programming, and took it from there. Yeah.
So you knew that there was a technical stuff that can really contribute to the artistic vision that you wanted to accomplish.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what I've done throughout my career. I always been more on the kind of slightly procedural side of kind of animation, or the kind of that middle ground of bringing the two worlds together. And try to get the most out of it, and even today, it's what we do.
Right. Well, that's fascinating. So when you graduate school, where did you go from there? What was your first job?
I started at Framestore.
Nice.
Straight after school, yeah. Again, so I worked on my first movie was Where the Wild Things Are.
That's a great film.
Face replacement. It had gone around the world to many studios, and somehow landed in Framestore. And one of my I was helping setting up the pipeline for the facial replacement already then.
That's what I was just gonna say. It's that's amazing that your first job was face replacement.
Yes, I was more on the technical kind of workflow and pipeline side, but it had animators involved. It had all the components that go into the more traditional computer graphics pipeline.
And so back then, what around what year was this, and what was involved in face replacement at that time?
At that time, it was like what it was a couple of years ago, maybe in a more primitive form of it. But pretty much 3D models, blend shape rakes, animators animating them, and
tracking geometry onto faces.
Yeah, tracking geometry and face replacing with the 3D renders basically of the animals. And there wasn't really any facial capture going on that specific project. It was more animators dialing in kind of shapes and making the faces emote on the big costumes that they shot. Still a beautiful film. I love that film, actually.
Oh, yeah. It was who directed it? Was it Mike Johnson? That's right.
So yeah, that was fun. Yeah, then but I only stayed at Framestore for about a year, and then I left for Australia. I went to work at Animal Logic.
Oh, nice.
For, about 2 years on Legend of the Guardians, the owl movie. So mostly animation, R&D, some crowd simulation towards the end.
Right.
Then yeah.
That was a highly underrated film. That was a DreamWorks film. Am I correct in that? No, it wasn't.
No. It's produced. They produce their films themselves. I think they were. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great
film. Actually, I think technically and visually, I still think maybe I'm biased, but that film looked stunning. Like the amount of birds we had and the amount of feather systems and the amount and the environments and kind of water simulation on top of feathers. It was a highly technical and I think well executed project, but the film itself just didn't. I think didn't do that well. It happens,
Oh, it happens all the time. I always joking. I was like, remember, Blade Runner was a flop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, no, or I shouldn't say a flop. Did not perform well, or seemingly did not perform well, and now is considered one of the greatest sci-fi films of all time. Exactly. So you don't necessarily have the immediate response that you want, but nonetheless, it was interesting. So having been on the technical side of things, that was pretty cool. So when did you start to really look at machine learning as a new platform for the visual effects world?
That's later. I feel like machine learning. There's obviously been this huge spike and exponential use and kind of the application like we've done in the last 2-3 years. Mm-hmm. But there's always been components as you know floating around and so after Animal Logic, I came back to London, did a stint of MPC. We were doing a lot of crowd simulation and kind of things.
Were you always on the like a TD side of things when you were doing
side? That? Yes. Okay. So again, trying to facilitate that. I worked on this on World War Z, like the pyramids.
Oh, right.
The swarms of zombies. Like that was highly technical in its own right. But machine learning, I think, after I left MPC, I joined ILM London when it started up, and I think our facial pipeline there, which I at some point started to specialize in, together with the team at Disney Research. I think that's where the more heavy kind of machine learning components started to take part for topology reconstruction from an array of cameras. We've been working on.
Tell me a little bit about that project and how did you get involved with Disney Research? The Disney Research in Zurich, I'm assuming.
Yeah, the Zurich team. Yeah, Derek, Bradley, and the guys. Yeah. And that was for Aladdin, actually, the Will Smith driven Aladdin. So that was the first implementation of their Medusa Anima toolset on a feature film. So it removed the need for facial markers, and it would kind of be shot with a camera array, and the actor would have a bit of freedom. It wouldn't be fully static facial capture. So that's I was CG soup on that film, mostly looking into the adoption of that tool set for that film.
Of markerless tracking.
Yes, markerless. So it's markerless kind of 3D topology reconstruction, which then gets inverted onto a facial rig, and the animators could kind of work on top of that. So which was highly interesting, and I think also ultimately successful. We had the one of the advantages there is that we ultimately made the genie look like Will Smith, like in terms of facial anatomy, and so the retarget was almost 1-to-1, and that helps, because
of course
there's once you start going between different facial morphologies, it gets harder, but yeah. So and those tools they sit on a lot of machine learning components. This is the thing, which which is like, okay, it's now in the spotlight, machine learning, and it's not called AI, and it gets a little
It's
bit.
what I want to. It's exactly what I want to get to. I think people need to realize it's not like machine learning just sort of appeared
Yes,
out of nowhere. No,
exactly.
and especially in visual effects, like we've been using this for like 10 plus years.
Yeah.
We didn't always call it AI because it's
Exactly. Even
we
like
called it machine learning. We called
Yeah.
it some
Yeah,
and
even
there's
like
always
denoising workflows, and like these have been around for a couple of years, like
automation and camera tracking,
Yeah.
like all So
just
anything that's
out of
vision,
nowhere.
this camera, that's the in computer vision is all sort of machine learning in some
Yes.
ways, and we've been using that for a long time.
Yes, yes.
Which is interesting because that's something that like machine learning is obviously we're going to talk about the taboo part
Yeah.
of machine learning, but I think it's really interesting that you talked about that and digital humans obviously. So you've been part of sort of a digital human thing for a while, and I know
Yeah.
that Derek
Yeah.
over and Tao as well.
Yeah.
They were very much into to understanding digital human stuff. What were your thoughts about digital humans at that time? Like before you doing what you're doing now, which we're going to get into, what were your thoughts about digital humans as a concept and as an issue in visual effects?
I have a lot of thoughts on
Of course. Luckily, we have a lot of time.
Imagine. Yeah, no. So, but I mean, maybe it's worth taking a step forward then, like from that project, like. I worked a little bit on feathered dinosaurs for a certain project, but then ILM London landed a big, not canonical film project, which was the ABBA Voyage concert that
Oh, right.
that it runs here in London, in East London, and the Ben Morris he came to me at some point and he's like, well, we're back into digital humans and faces, and let's try to figure this out, which is like an hour and a half of photoreal, highly dynamic performances, sourced from captures of the current day ABBA. So where you do have like that retargeting challenge as an addition. So it was kind of the Aladdin genie pipeline, but you had like an element of retargeting from between ages, and that also then ultimately we ended up working very closely with Derek and his team at Disney Research and create a very specific tool for that would allow to. Because there's a lot of ways that you can go about retargeting. Some this in the simplest form, some deformation transfer, which is usually high fidelity in performance field, but it loses a lot of likeness. It loses a lot of the identity. So we wanted to ensure identity across the expression range of the character in the 3D world. This is something that we handle a lot today as well in the more full AI machine learning world.
Sure.
But back then that was definitely a tricky component in that pipeline, because and for me it's just to go zoom out a little bit and doing digital humans the traditional way. So 3D model, that in itself, the neutral, you can work for months to hit an identity specifically. Then you have only like your neutral phase, right? Then you're going off and you're going to do like 400 or 500 blend shapes that all need to obey like the expression within the articulation of the face. So that's hard too. Then obviously you have all the layers of texturing, shading. You got hair simulation, and you do your performance capture. So we go out to Sweden, for example, and we spend 2 months with the original ABBAs performing all their songs, capture that performance, and you reconstruct very dense topology to capture every movement, every kind of nuance of their performance. But then you have to obviously extract that from this super dense topology and retarget it to like the younger faces, these models that you've built. Because ultimately what you want is you want to activate these 400 or 500 blend shapes to recreate a performance on the younger character of the delivered by the older character in this traditional pipeline. So you have that step, and then obviously you have usually an animator coming in and tweaking it, right? Because every step you lose, right? There is degradation happening at every step. So comes in to kind of tweak and bring to life what you lost. You then run like potential really high resolution skin simulations, also to regain the connectivity that you lose throughout the entire process. And at the end of the day, you have the hard challenge of making sure it's lit correctly, the subsurface is good, it looks correct, it looks real. Sure. So there's so much going into, so much steps, so much people, so much pipeline, so much tools going into this whole process. And what I found from doing it for so long is that ultimately your net result, if that's 100%, is your success is actually 100% minus the percentage that you lose at every step of the pipeline, right? And you can have like arguably the best artists in the world at every station of that pipeline, the best tools you can imagine in between, the best pipeline, hooking it all together. But still, everywhere you might lose 0.5 to 1% of fidelity, and if you accumulate that, ultimately you lose 5 to 10% of fidelity.
Which gets you smack dab in the middle of the uncanny valley.
Exactly. The problem is the uncanny valley is not linear, right? You end up literally
right in the middle,
at the wrong side of that slope. And you've done actually an incredible job, and everybody has, but you're still in that zone where it's problematic.
So I don't know if you know this, but many years ago, like 10 years ago or so, I started a group called the WikiHuman Project, and it involved people like Derek and a bunch of people of the Digital Domain, et cetera, and Paul Debevic and those guys. And the idea was to get all those people in a sort of a neutral ground, right? All knowledgeable, like you were saying, right? The problem I saw at that time, which we'll get to why your solution is a completely different way of looking at things. But the problem at that time is that people didn't know, artists didn't know what was truth and what was interpreted. Right?
Yeah.
And so you would get these people that would get these unbelievable scans done over at ICT, at the lab or whatever, and they get all these high fidelity, perfectly calibrated texture maps, and they would start messing with things. And like, that's the truth. Don't mess with the ground truth. And so the whole point of the WikiHuman project was to establish what ground truth was and show them ground truth so that they could start with that as opposed to messing with it. Because the minute you start messing with things that are not ground truth, then you get caught in the weeds of going down the wrong path. And it can take months and months and months and months to fix those problems, right?
Yeah.
Because interpretation visually is very, very hard for us to do.
Yeah, totally. And and ultimately, I think that's the other element to all these steps and all these pipelines. You have too many choices or too much freedom in every step, which kind of makes it extremely controllable, but it actually works against you. You want to constrain yourself into
less
reality.
Variables.
Yeah, exactly. Less variables, not more in this case. Yeah. But I do have something to say, but maybe we stash it about the too perfectness in hindsight, seeing how these new technologies deal with training data. Maybe we can get to it now. Like when we train our neural networks, we've done experiments where we feed it like light stage type inputs and footage, where all lights are perfectly positioned within that dome, and all cameras are perfectly positioned. And I've generally found that these networks, they learn some sort of over artificialness from that, and the networks, the outputs they produce bake in some sort of it just doesn't feel as natural as if you go out and put like a few more kind of natural lighting condition and shoot a data set in that. And somehow it made me reflect back. We extracted everything from textures and lighting and from these setups. Maybe we were as much as it was required to for the ground truth that you mentioned. Maybe it was what we were making was just inherently too perfect to begin with,
Right.
as well. So I think it cuts both
I
sides.
think people underestimate just trying to do things simply, right? Visual effects people are famous for trying to make very, very complicated pipelines
Yeah.
when they don't need them, right?
Yeah.
And I remember my example is that I was working on the movie Oblivion, and we were doing a digital double of Tom Cruise. Spoiler alert: he fights himself in a movie, but we're doing a digital double of him, and they were like, I said, before we get the entire, text, I was the lighting supervisor on it. It's like, before we get all the people involved, let me just take a stab at just putting him into a scene to see where we are as a ground truth. And so I said, I'm going to take care of the shaders and everything. And so I put him in, and it's like, oh my God, he looks perfect. What did you do? I said, you know what I did? I did nothing. I just took the data exactly as it was, and I plugged it in, and I didn't mess with anything. And I used shaders that I knew were correct based on what it is. And then the rest was just a lighting scenario. And if the lighting matched, the world matched, and it worked. And so I think I remember like people like, oh, if you just sort of try to keep things naturally and you don't try to interpret what you think is wrong, and then sometimes you'll get a pretty good result.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely many ways to overdo it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, especially in textures and skin shaders and and then I think also you were mentioning animation, right? When you're doing animation, I think animators, when there's the uncanny valley causes a negative reaction emotionally for people, right? And and the uncanny valley usually gets you there, just as you mentioned, just a few percentage off, right?
Yeah.
But emotionally, that reaction is like 20, 50, 60% off.
Yes.
Right. And so animators react with an overreaction, and they can never sort of get back to where it is, where it might only be 0.5%, but they don't know. There's emotionally, it's not connecting at a much higher level, so they overreact in terms of animation.
Yeah, no, that I have seen that happening for sure. Yes.
Yeah,
and it's a very it's almost like when you ask somebody in a mocap shoot to act a walk, you'll get like a weird
exaggerated walk.
It's in its simplest way. It's the same concept, but when you just capture them when they walk off stage, when the shoot ends, that's the walk you'll probably want to use in your simulation.
Yeah. I think that was really fascinating, and specifically when I was looking at the animation of Thanos in the last couple of Endgame, is the actor really underperformed emotionally, and the performance was way more believable in terms of what he was doing, right? And so I think I'm not to disparage specific performances, but I think that a lot of actors sometimes they over exaggerate, right? And I think they came from the first sort of digital human that everyone sort of really gravitated for was Gollum when they saw Andy Serkis do it, and then they all went the Andy Serkis way of overacting, which I think that sort of defies digital humans. And
there's a time and a place for it.
There was a time for Gollum for sure.
I thought, for Gollum, or like on the genie, I think for the Aladdin project, I think that worked, like because you want that exaggerated performance, but if you're going for full realism, it's easily throws you off. Yeah,
emotions especially, right? And it's, if you're getting a close up like you have on my face right now, if I go it just looks.
And that
look right.
goes up with the tag that we use today as well. We've done recent projects where the input, if it's over driven, it'll then you can see almost the network will fight it. For example, in the Ian Holm for Alien that we worked on, the actor was quite expressive. I mean, brilliant performance, but Ian's native expression space is quite muted. So the match there was definitely something we had to tweak and mute and kind of reduce a little bit, because that facial expression set of space of Ian just doesn't go that far, and you can see it when the network starts to struggle. Like, I don't know how to make this face because he just doesn't make that face to that amplitude. Yeah.
Right. Well, let's get in a little, because I want to make sure we have time to get into obviously what you guys did on here. But let's get into a little bit of your technology. Explain how we've gone through the traditional way of doing digital humans, where you capture all this stuff and how complicated it is. What is it that you guys are doing, and how is it completely different from what's going on?
Yeah. So I mean, the big difference is that the asset that used to be the 3D asset, which you would hit render on and produces the pixels that you comp into your plates, is now a neural network, and the neural network is trained on reference footage of the actor or the persona that we want to recreate, and that has an effect of implicitly, I like to call it implicitly constraining it to the identity. First and foremost, but also the identity through the expression space. So there is some great kind of properties there that already, as we said before, reduce the set of parameters. Obviously, there's a lot of parameters within the networks themselves to be able to synthesize these faces. And
what's the process you go through though? Like explain like, suppose let's say you're going to take, I don't know. Let's take Tom Hanks, for example.
Yeah.
Right? What do you take with Tom Hanks? Like, let's take him and say we're gonna capture his face. So what is the process in which you go through with him?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. If we want to do Tom Hanks today, we'll go out and do a data capture shoot with them, which we also did for here because we wanted his expression space of today, because ultimately you create some sort of mapping, right? That is facial. Facial transfer going on within the network as you feed a face in, but for here specifically, we obviously kind of went and kind of sourced together with the production a bunch of Tom's movies at these age targets where we want to kind of synthesize him at with our network. So
what do? You just take the footage of those movies and you just
we'll take the footage, and we have like a quite an extensive tool set that its sole purpose is like in kind of ingesting. So you'll get a movie, you kind of identify the faces in it, you recognize them, you kind of pull them out, and it preps them for in the best possible way. To feed them to the network training. Right. That's kind of or we have a data unit with a Metaphysic that does that, covers that process, and they hand that off to what we call our visual data scientist. I think that's the best description. They're people that understand the data science recipes, because there is a lot of nuance as to how you curate these data sets, how you present them to the network, for how long. There's a whole lot of hyperparameters to be tuned. How long, at what hyperparameter tuning do you expose it? And there's a whole there's
a whole thing called overtraining sometimes. Right?
Yes, yeah, you can overtrain, you can undertrain, or you cannot be generalized enough. And so it takes an artist, and this is, I think, an important thing to that people might not think about in the first place when you like, oh, they did it with AI. But ultimately, that process is I see that as the asset build where you're giving feedback to the modeler. What
is the decision process of the person doing that's feeding the training? What is the decision of the person doing that?
I mean, ultimately, they're obviously looking at they have their tools. They're looking at loss graphs. They're looking at how the networks are kind of converging. But what happens most, or kind of Daly's creative loop, they'll kind of run out what we call kind of outputs of the network onto the destination target footage, and they'll submit that to Daly's, and they'll be like, here, this is where we're at, and then we'll look at it. maybe it's soft, or maybe the lighting doesn't get adopted, or maybe sometimes the face comes out deformed, like so sometimes the face sometimes we send it through some kind of workout, and we see that the performance is reduced, or the performance is amplified, or we see performance mismatches, and that's when we go into our neural performance tools. But just not to skip ahead to that right now. So there's an intricate loop of these visual data scientists, or AI artists, we can call them as well, or ML artists, whatever you want to call it, guiding this training very meticulously, and very often look at what comes out of these networks and submit that into dailies, or assess them by themselves and iterate on the training. Some analogy.
So there are variables. There are variables.
Many variables. An analogy to the more kind of traditional visual effects world for me are complex physics simulations.
Right.
They run for a while, and you have a lot of parameters, and a visual output comes out, and the great effects TD has this intuition of how to put the parameters, so he doesn't have to iterate and wait like 2 days for like 100 times until he hones into the great recipes. And that's I think where the skills come in. And this is something that it's talent, it's intuition, but it's also an eye for what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
So this is where I think we are kind of in a place where having that overlap. But then also, especially because it's all new, have your ML engineers and your more PhD types close to that process, so they can help from an architectural point of view. They can be like, they are part of the conversation in terms of like, okay, we actually really struggle with the identity of this specific network. The output is it's like Tom Hanks's cousin. It's not Tom Hanks that's coming out right now. So so maybe they're. And we've tried so many things. We've tried. Maybe there's an architectural. Maybe there is something in the architecture of the neural network that can be adjusted to. So that's another component, especially because it's also bleeding edge. It's also new. You're kind of figuring it out. Figure it out as you go. Yeah.
Right. I think it's interesting, because even Tom Hanks, like back when he did Forrest Gump, and he did the running scene, he didn't do all the running. His brother did some of it because his brother looks a lot like him. So it's just funny. It's like, it looks like his cousin. It's like, but you can't get away with that. You can get away with it for a running shot in the background. Montage, you can't.
It's hard. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Much hard. So it's interesting, and it's great to hear that you still feel that there is an artistic interpretation that needs to take place, right? In terms
100%.
of
yeah, I think so. Yeah, 100%. I mean, obviously we. That's kind of the secret sauce, because it's not just like, I'm gonna just create a neural network and hop, we're done, like let's move on. It's the intuition and the know-how on how to train them to produce these extremely compelling results that retain the performance. Like here, it's like deeply emotional performances. There is nowhere to nowhere to hide, right? And it's Tom Hanks. People also know Tom Hanks extremely well, what he looked like. So you have to hit him 100% identity wise, and you need to retain his performance 100% for the movie to work. And that was, I think, the enormous challenge for this movie. Like, which, I mean, having been there, and it's a pipeline close to my heart, but I would be extremely concerned doing with a more fully traditional. Kind of facial pipeline, as we discussed earlier. Because it's just the consistency you get from these networks once they're trained well. That's another great property, because a lot of faces where movies, like sometimes you see great shots, but then you see shots that are like but they just.
I worked on Tron Legacy. I know exactly what you're talking about.
You go, yeah, which looked great, to be honest. Like
some look great, some did not, and it was hard to miss, right? Because it's been a long time since I worked on that movie, but it's one of those things, right? Like, you don't really know how good it's going to look, and you keep struggling with. I know, where it's this thing where it's like, I don't know why it's wrong, but I know it is wrong, right? Yeah. And then so the not knowing why is harder. But it sounds to me like once you have the training done in a specific way, it's much easier for you to more consistently hit a target.
It is. And it's obviously a data game as well. Like we've recently done projects where the further you go back, the less data and the more impaired your data is, and then it becomes much harder. We obviously have built a lot of tools that are like data augmentation type of tools. Like if your data is limited or there's issues, like you have to kind of fill that in because it's a data game in the end. Visual data science is still data science, right? So it needs data. But so that's another component to it.
I think it's interesting also, that you said that the people are still very much involved, and that, I've always said the secret sauce in digital humans is good artists.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, you can have a lot of tech and that really helps, right?
Yeah.
But without good artists, that tech is useless, right?
Totally.
And so I've always said that, which is cool. So I do have a question, since you bring up the training, right? And so I was thinking about this, and I was like, okay, so you have your A and your B, right? So your A is where you're coming from, and you needed to put it onto B, or other way around. Anyway, but you have so many different films of Tom Hanks, right? Mm-hmm. And so you have to hit Tom Hanks at all these different levels, and obviously his age is different, but also the footage is different of Tom Hanks in all of these different areas, right? Different color space, different film. Some is shot on film with different grain. The choices of lighting that's done on Tom Hanks in 1990 is going to be different than they were in Castaway or whatever, or 80s or whatever, right? So Tom Hanks from Big is not the same as Tom Hanks from Castaway. Yeah, like not just in age, but in terms of the film style. Mm-hmm. So how does that affect your training? To keep your film style consistent throughout this whole process?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's ultimately, again, the more data you have, the more varied. I mean, that all plays into what we would call a more generalized model that is capable of understanding each of its components. And by that I mean there is a component of pose, there's a component of lighting, and there's a component of expression. That's kind of your three main layers that you're trying to optimize for. And sometimes you have a data set that is much stronger in one than the other. So that's one thing. But feeding all this varying data, and you're right, that's definitely a thing, into the machine to train is something you start with at the base layer of your model. And you can, if you know what you're working towards, obviously we do sometimes try to pull these things closer together as a pre-processing step to kind of make it easier for the network to understand and to come up with a more coherent output. Because you're right, if you have all this angle like in a specific lighting condition, a specific film treatment, and you have like only that angle but in an entirely different world, then you don't want when in your output when he does this, you don't want it to go from one piece of footage to the other. So that's where it gets generalized. But ultimately to achieve all the age targets and to achieve a look, it's again that visual data science, and that it's never one train fits all. Like you want to train a robust generalized model, but then when you need Tom Hanks at 18, you start to reduce and hone in your data set for a specific branch of the model, if you like, where you hone into that specific set of data or that specific look to achieve these different ages. And this is actually something this is the other thing, like if you would be doing it in a traditional pipeline and you need to model all these specific ages and set up all these pipelines for and these different assets, that in itself would probably also be much more time consuming and hard to achieve than honing into it with this more kind of data science approach. Yeah. Plus, the last element to it is that you do let these models also train a little bit against the target footage that they will they will ultimately run their inference on. So they can learn the two-way street is a two-way street, right? They can learn what's going on in that scene lighting wise, and they can tailor the base network that is gonna put young Tom Hanks on old Tom Hanks, but understand the scene within the context of the network, and that's important, an important step too. That ultimately provides kind of coherence and pulls it pulls your output more into your scene. Yeah.
Right. Well, we've been talking about Tom Hanks so far because obviously he's been one of the people in this, but it's actually you were doing with two characters, right?
Yeah, four.
And you had two. You had Robin Wright, who was very much an important part of this, obviously, and she went through a similar process, right?
She did. So did Paul and Kelly. They're younger. They're their youngest age. They also.
So how? What did you see massive difference in training and in decision making based on what you were getting from Robin's character compared to Tom's character?
Yeah, definitely. And it's hard to kind of summarize in like a one sentence like the specific differences, but these data sets are very different. The with a female, because you tend to have like kind of a smoother skin, especially at the younger ages, and that easily goes into like a level of softness, keeping a young face detail without it looking like a Gaussian type of blur art, kind of, you know what I mean, is challenging. It's more challenging than being able to harvest at a decent resolution a lot of kind of facial features and skin detail. So that needs another treatment. And another interesting thing with Robin was the back and forth and the collaboration with the makeup team, because they were doing specific makeup to communicate a certain time within the movie. And obviously, when we do our face swap, we would kind of the base layer of that would do away with that, and all the
you're trying to preserve the makeup decision.
We needed to preserve that, so we needed a way, and we did test. Luckily, before we started shooting with Jenny, how to do that, and obviously you have the compositing way at the end of the day, retrieve, and some of that was ultimately still done, but there was also a level of we shot some footage that had that makeup, and kind of start to infuse that onto your data set and within your training. So mold your data set to make it have the look that you want to achieve, so it can produce a look that kind of sits with the makeup and that respects what's in the plate as much as possible, because ultimately the cinematographer is lighting the plate, the makeup artist is doing the style of the makeup, and obviously the actor is bringing the performance. This tool, it works best if every component is retained and respected, because that's the challenge that we try to work on a lot. And I think ultimately that's also how it feels seamless, and how you watch this, and don't question it. They are there in that scene. Yeah.
So I've always been a big proponent about the exciting part of real-time visual effects.
Yes.
Right? And I want to get into this a little bit. So I'm going to give you an example. The biggest problem that a lot of people complain about movies, saying they're bad because they've got too much CG. And what they're really complaining about is the movie's bad because the movie uses a lot of CG. And one of the reasons the movie might be bad is because a lot of decisions had to be made in post. And the filmmakers themselves have no control of their movies because they're just shooting it on a giant green screen or blue screen, and they don't actually know what everything is going to look like. So everything's done in a very bland and generic way, leaving the pressure on the visual effects artist, who has to make decisions after it's been done and interpret what they think the filmmaker wanted to do.
And again, a lot of decisions possible at that point. Like, so
Absolutely correct. And so with digital humans, obviously you shoot these performances, right? And especially when you're trying to do rejuvenation, right? When you're trying to take young Jeff Bridges and Tron, et cetera, you're taking someone that is significantly older and trying to make them look 30, 50 years younger, right? And their performance may be challenging to them to act 50 years younger. It's easier for you maybe to look older than it is to look younger, but it's still harder to do that. And especially if you don't know what it's going to look like until you see it a year later, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be really hard to do that. And I know that, like, you know, there was issues, for example, when people looked at The Irishman, they're like, that doesn't look right. And it wasn't necessarily that ILM did a bad job. ILM did a very good job, but it just was not harder to do that. So with that, I know that because I've heard interviews, people like, I've heard like Tom was like, I got to see what I did and make an adjustment on set. So what is that like to finally as a visual effects artist work very directly with actual performance and capture?
Yeah. I think that was more so than I expected, like definitely a game changer and something that that is so beneficial that you almost cannot think about a world where you wouldn't have it, because you're right, like usually we might have someone on set shooting, getting some chrome balls and all that, but we only like 6 months later get involved, and by that time the shoot's done and dusted. But in this case, having the real-time system, especially to the fidelity that we managed to run it.
And just to be clear, that the real-time was not necessarily the final, right?
No, exactly. No, there was not the final. So
it's like really good previs.
Really good previs. Yeah, like I dare I say, like previs that is kind of better than I think what you'd get to with a traditional pipeline. And I think I'm probably not far off, like with that statement. Right. But it's well, we this all happened really fast, and we obviously landed the project doing a screen test where we kind of de-aged in a more offline way, and then Kevin Bailey asked me, like, you think there's any way that we could run anything like maybe in the dailies or overnight or real time, like, and I remember having this phone call, this Zoom meeting where I kind of showed up with kind of a pretty photorealistic face. So he's like, yeah, that's what we need. That's what we should do. And but then making that system work to run on a film set. We all know the level of fidelity and the robustness of a tool that you require. Plus also running it on 2 characters. With sometimes multiple people in the scene. So ultimately they would send us out like an HD feed of the camera. We would ingest that. We had like a big server with a couple of GPUs outside the set. It sounded like a jet engine, so it could definitely not be anywhere near the set. So it was like a little cabin outside the set in Pinewood. And so we would first run a recognition step, because sometimes there's multiple characters in the room, so you need to find Tom and Robin so you're not swapping them onto someone else. Once you have that, we would run inference on reduced resolution networks, because we had like a millisecond budget to keep everything real time. So that would produce 2 face swaps with kind of masks for both characters. And that would then be fed into an optimized compositing step, which is an optimized version of a proprietary kind of color and detail transfer method that we developed specifically for this, but which runs also on the GPU. So ultimately we send that back, and Bob has a monitor on the left, which is his raw feed, and on the right, like about four frames later, he sees Tom and Robin like in their younger versions, the age that is supposed to
4 frames.
About 4 frames. And in the beginning, like I was curious, like I was kind of watching him direct the scenes. I was like, I wonder what kind of monitor he's going to be looking at. Surely, I mean, I've been on sets like with, for example, Steven Spielberg, and there is like the kind of virtual world
Yeah.
And some directors, I think, embrace it, but some also they look at it once and it's almost like a bit of a gimmick and they don't use it, right? So I had this somehow in the back of my mind. But then just looking at Bob, he was always tuned in to the young characters, to the young feed, and he had, it was a tool for him to direct the young characters and talk about the performance holistically with the young face, which would be impossible if you're right.
Did the actors themselves look at
and
themselves?
They as well, yeah. So
because sometimes actors don't want to do that, right?
No, they leaned into it for sure. They leaned into it because they came back after every take, and in the director's tent, they would slip the audio 4 frames. The Q take would slip the audio 4 frames, so it would be bang on them with the young faces in the lighting, and they use it as a tool. Like, okay, this doesn't work. I need to open up, because it's extremely hard to act a body performance or at that age. And I think Tom says this as well in certain interviews, how helpful and it was to have that immediate feedback.
Sure.
And otherwise you just don't get to have it, right? You'll shoot something and that's what you have to deal with, and there's no way unless you trigger a reshoot. But yeah, that was, I think that I expected it. Yeah, I didn't expect the impact it would actually have. Sure. And also for us, like, I would look at, as we were shooting a scene with Kevin, we would look at, okay, maybe we suggest to turn the characters a little bit, because we could see where the networks, even though our offline networks are quite a bit better than the real-time networks, but it would be an indicator of what would work well. It would be an indication for the DOP on how the light would react with the young faces. So everybody leaned into the tool and had this as a proxy preview. But and ultimately then they would walk from set with young faces for the edit, and test screenings would have that in the edit, which is another thing. Like, you usually have to wait 6 months for a grayscale animation play blast, which doesn't tell you anything. So yeah, transformational, that part for sure.
So what I think is fascinating, is that when people hear about, that they used AI on this, which is the worst statement, honestly speaking, as a visual effects person, I find that almost insulting. But you have so many people involved in the aesthetic decision-making process of what you guys did, right? There are so many artists involved, right? Artists that are actually doing this, including the director and the actor who could directly drive their performance and make their adjustments as they needed, where they never had that opportunity to do that before. No. It was way more removed. So do you think that it's ironic that people are saying what they're saying about AI tools, the way that you guys have derived them, when in fact it is one of the most collaborative creative process that I've heard of for digital humans?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just a bit of an overall generalization of you cannot conflate like the prompt and get an image with this process. It's so different. AI have so many faces at this point, and I think it's important to understand, just like as we just covered, like how this tool indeed empowered every creative in the process. Every creative in the process was more involved. You said it brilliantly, actually, rather than less involved in the creation of the visual effects. It just gelled and brought it all together. So yeah, but that's I think it's, in this case, it's a brilliant tool, and it's an advancement of a process that has been a process for a long time, that had machine learning components peppered into it. It just has it in a few different places now, with the added benefit that we could actually do it there and then in the heart of the filmmaking process. And it was great. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, where do you see this going? Like, what's your like your final thoughts on this? Like, obviously you guys have created this thing. You've seen the results. People have seen something, right? And there might be, people might have mixed feelings about it, either emotionally, aesthetically, or, ethically, or whatever. But what is your thoughts about this in terms of filmmaking, and like how filmmaking might be adopted in this way?
Yeah, ultimately it's a good kind of prototype, and I still think it's a prototype because there's so many things that can be done with this. But a good example of if implemented in a way that is controllable, and actually we haven't even discussed our neural performance tool set, which allows us to.
Yeah, if you can give me a quick summary, that'd be great.
No, yeah, but well, that in a nutshell, basically, one of the drawbacks of this technology used to be that the neural network is a bit of a black box, right? You put something in, something comes out, and that's what you get. And then you can do a lot in training, and you can go a lot back and forth. But at some point, you might be in a place where you're stuck, and because it's too general, the training process, you don't have the surgical control that filmmakers like to have. Sure. So our neural performance toolset sits on top of that, and allows you to go in and to make very specific adjustments to performance, or to not performance, to kind of fix, for example, an eye line. An eye line might be off. So Kevin and Bob could give us a note and be like, okay, just change that a little bit, or the amplitude of a certain expression that was delivered on set wouldn't come fully through. So, but all this is kind of you can think about it as like a blend shape rig that moves topology around, but it's actually a set of sliders that nudges the neural network to achieve kind of fine grain control.
So you have like neural networks could be like blend shapes. So
yes,
more
exactly.
of this network, less that network. And
yes, exactly. Yeah. And we have like an animation unit which I branded neural animators. They might be the first of their kind.
Neural animators, I love it.
And they love it because they literally work they're in Nuke, and they're kind of adjusting parameters, and they see it in real time. The inference is up 1 second. They see it updating, and they're like, because that's another group that used to animate on a grayscale face, and then like 5 days later they'd see the render. It's like,
hit a play blast and wait 20 minminutes.
That's not what I intended to do. So
yeah.
So they very kind of they adopted very, very quickly to this thing. But anyway, that's like another tool within the pipeline, like, and this is more in the offline pipeline where we were able to kind of get Bob's and Kevin's or filmmakers' feedback and give them a handle on the output and allow them to steer things. So yeah, so coming back to the original question, I mean, there is, I think, so many other fields within visual effects where this can be applied to in a very similar manner, like an LED wall that could have a prompt of an environment, or kind of a network that you train to create a world, and the director can on set like tweak that and work with it. But again, artists will go in and set that up just like you prepare the Unreal Engine scene for, but it's probably if done well, it can be faster. There's a hell of a lot of tools that can be kind of adjusted in a similar way, I think, and hopefully because of the speed of these type of tools can be brought closer to the filmmakers, and to the flip side of that, I said it recently in an interview. I don't see like James Cameron or Steven Spielberg or Bob Zemeckis like prompt scene in Avatar or in it's just not going to happen, because that's not how if movies could be made like that, we would have been making them very differently for a long time, and we're not. So
well, just look at what's on set right now, right? James Cameron does move a camera around, I get it, right? But not every filmmaker does. There's a whole crew of people that are necessary to do that. You still need to separate some tasks, right? And you still need those artists. Speaking of which, what is the role of the new visual effects artist in this new world? Like how if I'm a young visual effects artist and I went to school and I said, oh no, everything I've learned is obsolete. What is my new goal? Where do I need to go? What do I need to understand as my new role in the visual effects world or in the CG world now?
Yeah, I mean, it's the, it's like it's always been, in my opinion, where the eye and the understanding and what you're making is the primary thing and the primary skill to have and to build, and adopting to the tool set that is at hand at that time or for that task is the secondary bit of the equation, and ultimately learn what is out there, and what you see like professionals are using and picking up just from a tools perspective, is if that is a certain set of neural networks or a certain set of AI tools, is smart, because that's going to help you join teams that use that quicker, but honing your understanding of achieving visuals with it, that's not going away, and that's I think that's probably the balance to strike. Yeah.
I think I've always I think, you know, when especially when a lot of AI tools started to come onto board and people were very rebellious about it, I think people confused the word art and the word craft, right? Mm-hmm. They're two different things. And I think craft is always going to change, right? Because that's the whole nature of what craft is. It's an adaptation and progress. It's technology based, right? Craft is always technology based, even for hundreds of years. But what you're just saying is the artist tools is still the same, right? Artists still need, like, the role of the artist has not changed through this process, right?
No, yeah, exactly. And some artists will be more technical, but might find himself in that data science, maybe even that architectural world. If you're technically inclined, like that's where I like to live, or like start to hack away at some like early days Metaphysic. We were in LA working on the America Got Talent, and or Elvis that we revived. He was amazing, dance, voice, everything. He had just won the European Championship, Elvis, or so. I didn't even know that existed, but it does. Sure. And but the only one thing because of that big stage, was 17 years old. He was nervous, and he didn't smile enough in his performance. So he had this quite stale Elvis look. But now Elvis, if you look at reference of Elvis, and this is where the understanding of what you're trying to create comes in, he has this asymmetric, cheeky smile, flirting with the audience, and this is where we implemented the first version of like this neural performance. We would compute a nudge to the neural network that we would just apply over the entire performance, that would just nudge in a little bit of a smile. And just adding that to the output of the neural network as an edited layer, so to speak.
It's interesting because then it takes the responsibility away from the artist, from the actor, to do the performance correctly, right?
There we were actually augmenting it to, but it was mostly a likeness tool. Like you missed Elvis's kind of full on, because likeness resides in many facets, right? You have pure kind of likeness and pure look, but expression, delivery of something is as important, and can break the believability of things. Hence, it was also so successful. Tom Hanks acting Tom Hanks, right? Like in younger, there's no middleman. It's just as authentic as it can be. So it was a likeness tool. But you're right. It's also potentially a slippery slope where you can start kind of adjusting performances. It's to be handled with care. These type of tools, for sure.
Right. So you can take down Andy Serkis's performance a little bit more.
There you go.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. We're over an hour, but I mean, we can go a lot longer, but I think we'll keep it at this. Fascinating. What can you tell me? Is there anything that you can tell me what's next for you guys? I'm sure there's some things you must keep secret, but at least where can we learn more about what's going on next?
I mean, we're kind of working on a good few projects at the moment, and think keeping the innovation, and as we covered, like looking at. We've solved arguably one of the hardest parts of the frame. So now it's expanding that and also looking like where else can we achieve better pictures and more integration and just push the tools forward. That's kind of it's interesting because we if you speak with filmmakers, and this is the beauty of it, you show them this stack and you show them what you achieved and what you have. You often find that they look at it through a lens of what they're trying to solve and what they want to do in the next project, and ideas just come out and come back to us, and that's where we go and try to understand how they can be solved with these tools, how we can morph our tools or like add extra components to so yeah, I think it's an incredibly exciting journey ahead to see where this can go.
Amazing, Yo. Well, thank you so much for being part of this and to just tell us about this incredible project that you guys have been working on. I've been following this. Ed has been excited to tell me about this, and it's like I can't wait for you to see this thing. I can't wait for you to see it. So I'm very excited that you guys have gotten here and were able to do this. And congratulations on the amazing work. I can't wait to see what's next. And thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thank you so much.